In the summer of 1992, Daniel and Paige Whitmer set off for a romantic rowing trip on the foggy coast of Maine. Locals remember seeing them launch from the tiny harbor at Devil's Elbow, never to return. The boat was found drifting 3 days later, empty. But in 2024, a construction crew dredging the harbor uncovers a rusted waterproof camera sealed inside a diver's pouch. When they develop the last roll of film, one grainy photo shocks investigators. The final image shows Daniel and Paige smiling in their boat, but there are 4 people on board. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic cold cases, twisted disappearances, and true crime stories that leave you speechless. August 4th, 202 location, Devil's Elbow Harbor, Maine. The fog rolled in thick and early that morning, just like it always had. Most people had forgotten about Daniel and Paige Whitmer. It had been 32 years since the couple vanished from Devil's Elbow in a simple aluminum rowboat. Tourists still asked about the story, sometimes whispers of the honeymooners who never made it back. But locals had stopped speculating decades ago. Everyone assumed they drowned. But on that hot August morning, a backhoe operator dredging the eastern slipway for a new harbor expansion snagged something unusual: a corroded metal case wrapped in mesh netting. Inside was a waterproof diver's pouch sealed tight, and within that, a disposable Kodak camera still intact. When the film was finally developed, the images were faded but visible. Shots of tide pools, selfies, a half-eaten sandwich, a photo of Paige midlaugh as Daniel rowed. But the last photo, the one taken right before the disappearance, wasn't just Paige and Daniel. There were 4 people in the boat, 2 smiling in the foreground and 2 more in the shadows near the stern. The photo lay flat on the evidence table, still damp at the corners, curling slightly at the edges. Even through the plastic gloves, Detective Marley Greer could feel the weight of it. Not the physical weight. The weight of 32 years of silence pressing down on a single image. 2 people sat in the center of the frame, young, tanned, sunlit. The man wore a red Sox cap, tilted back just enough to reveal his soft smile and a dark smudge of sunblock across the bridge of his nose. The woman leaned into him, her cheek pressed lightly to his shoulder, her dark hair windblown and loose. She wore a simple tank top, a wedding ring just visible on her left hand. Daniel and Paige Whitmer, married for 13 days, missing for 32 years. Should have been just the 2 of them in the boat. Everyone remembered it that way. That's how the story went, how it had always gone. A young couple on their honeymoon, rowing out from Devil's Elbow on a foggy July evening. A rented skiff, a picnic cooler, a blanket. They were seen leaving the harbor around 6. The boat was found 3 days later, drifting just north of Gulls Point, empty.
Ow.
No signs of a struggle, no bodies recovered, no real explanation. The prevailing theory had always been that they drowned. Some locals said the tide changed suddenly, caught them in a riptide, dragged them out. Others liked the ghost story better, said the harbor was cursed. The truth was that no one knew, until now. Marley leaned in, was subtle, barely visible in the shadows at the edge of the frame, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. A hand, not Paige's, not Daniel's, resting just behind Paige's shoulder, pale and thin, with bitten fingernails and veins raised under the skin like blue wire. And behind Daniel's head, farther back, almost hidden in the dark patch at the stern, a second face, unsmiling, watching the lens, eyes locked on whoever was taking the photo. There were 4 people on that boat. Marley didn't speak for a long moment. The evidence lab was quiet, just the soft hum of machines and the distant whirs of the air conditioning. Nicole Harson, the forensic tech who developed the film, stood at her side, arms crossed, waiting. "You're sure this hasn't been tampered with?" Marley asked without looking away. "Positive," Nicole said. "It's from a 1991 Funsaver, Kodak. The film chemistry matches the production lot. We checked the timestamps, degradation curve, even ran it against UV exposure and seawater decay. It's clean, authentic." Marley straightened up, her mind already assembling the old case file like a blueprint. July 12, 1992, the Whitmers rented a boat from a local marina. Small aluminum skiff, oars, 2 life jackets. Paige was 27, a second-grade teacher from Bucksport. Daniel was 31, did custom woodwork, mostly cabinetry. They'd stayed in a cabin just off Old Quarry Road, Booked 2 weeks, vanished halfway through. She'd been a kid when it happened. Her mother worked part-time at the town pharmacy back then, and she used to keep a little stack of bridal registry printouts behind the counter. Marley remembered Paige's name on one of them. She remembered the posters, too. Sun-bleached photos stapled to utility poles all over town. Paige's smiling face. Daniel's ball cap. Missing. Last seen July 12th. Marley turned back to the table. Do we have a timestamp? Nicole pulled up the digital scan. July 12th, 6:14 p.m. Roughly 40 minutes before Tobin Marr, the dockhand, last claimed to see them rowing out past the split in the rocks. She remembered that statement. It had been buried at the end of the file, dismissed at the time. Tobin said he thought someone else was on the dock that night, maybe 2 people. Said they didn't get in the boat, but they watched. Didn't blink. Gave him a bad feeling. Cops had chalked it up to nerves, maybe small-town superstition. No evidence, no names, no follow-up. And now, here it was. Proof. 1 photo. For people, Marley took a slow breath. The case had been officially closed in 1993. Presumed drowned. No bodies, no crime, just a lot of sadness and a funeral without remains. But someone else had been there. So someone's in the boat, which meant Daniel and Paige didn't just disappear. They weren't lost. They were taken. Back at her office, Marley pulled the original case file from the archive box and dropped it on her desk with a heavy thud. Yellowed pages, stapled statements, a few grainy photos of the empty boat. Paige's parents had come in from Massachusetts to give a statement. Daniel's brother had flown in from Minnesota. A week of desperate searching and then nothing. Just a quiet memorial service and a lifetime of questions. She flipped through the timeline. The rental receipt was there, signed 5:37 p.m. by Daniel. The boat's serial number was written in red pen, DX4N27. The weather log showed mild wind. Tide around 7:15 p.m. Fog rolling in just before dusk. The boat had been found floating near Gull's Point 3 days later. Both oars missing, 1 life jacket still tucked under the seat. A skiff had been returned to the marina, cleaned, rented out again. The investigation had ended the day it was pulled ashore. Marley glanced at the whiteboard in her office. She'd scribbled 1 word at the top. Why? Why would someone go out of their way to hide a second couple in the boat? Why take the Whitmers? Why wait 32 years to be discovered? She looked back down at the photo. Paige was mid-laugh, her head tilted back slightly. Daniel had 1 hand on the oar, the other wrapped around her hip. Behind them, the other hand, TH1 resting on Paige's shoulder, was limp, relaxed, as if they weren't hiding, as if they belonged there. The second face in the shadow stared out from the photo like it had been waiting to be seen. Marley pulled her pen from her jacket and scratched out the last line on the case file summary. Status. Presumed drowned. Case closed. She drew a thick black line through the words and replaced them with 3 more. Case reopened. August 9th, 2024 outside. The fog had rolled in over the harbor again, thick and still. Somewhere beneath that water, the truth had waited for 32 years. Now it was starting to rise. The marina hadn't changed much since 1992. Marley stood on the warped wooden planks of the main dock, watching as the tide sloshed lazily beneath her boots. The rental shack was still painted the same pale blue, its paint flaking like sunburnt skin, and the same rusted wind chimes clinked from the eaves. A faded boat rentals sign hung crooked above the window, barely legible. The new owner, a heavy-set man in his 60s named Phil Marr, was the nephew of Tobin Marr, the dockhand who'd given the original witness statement. Tobin had passed away 10 years ago. Marley hadn't expected much from the visit, but Phil, it turned out, had never thrown anything away. He led her behind the counter and unlocked a metal filing cabinet, so dented it looked like it had been kicked shut a few dozen times. From inside, he pulled a ledger wrapped in a dry, crumbling paper towel. This, he said, tapping the cover with a stubby finger. Is every rental record from 1991 to 1993? My uncle was old school, logged everything by hand. Marley flipped it open. The pages were smudged with grease and salt, and the ink had faded in places, but the handwriting was surprisingly neat. Dates, names, time out, time in, serial numbers, boat condition. July 12, 1992, her eyes landed on the name D. Whitmer. Boat number 12, serial number DEX4N27, signed out at 5:37 p.m., estimated return, sunset. She ran her finger down the column. There was no check-in time, just a red circle with a question mark. Phil scratched his chin. My uncle marked it that way whenever someone didn't return a boat. Which usually meant they were late or the boat had to be towed. You probably already know this, but that boat showed up 3 days later, floating near the rocks, empty. Damned creepy. Marley flipped to the next day, July 13th. More names, more boats. One entry stood out. Boat number 12 again. Turned at 6:12 p.m., her brow furrowed. Did someone else use that boat before it was recovered? Phil leaned over. What the hell? He stared at the entry. That's not right. That boat wasn't back until the harbor patrol dragged it in on the 15th. Marley examined the line. No signature, just the initials Mount and shaky penmanship. Under note, someone had written, returned late, needed rinse, extra jacket on board. A chill crept down her spine. Do you know who Mount is? Phil shook his head slowly. No idea, but this isn't my uncle's handwriting. See here? He always used block letters. This one's cursive. Marley took a photo of the page with her phone and scanned the rest of the log. Nothing else unusual, no duplicate entries. But boat number 12 had somehow been logged back in before it was officially recovered, and someone had gone out of their way to include that detail about the extra life jacket. She stepped outside, trying to ignore the way the breeze carried the scent of seaweed and diesel, the kind of smell that always hung over this harbor like a warning. It was quiet this time of year. No tourists, no fishermen yelling over engine noise, just the creak of mooring lines and the water lapping against the shore. She stood at the edge of the dock, staring out toward the split in the rocks. If Daniel and Paige had rowed north, they would have passed Gull's Point just before the fog rolled in. They'd been aiming for open water, some quiet little cove, maybe away from the mainland. But the wind had picked up that night, and the fog had swallowed them whole, or that was what they'd all believed. Back at her office, Marley laid out the evidence on her whiteboard. Photojournal entry, rental log, missing persons reports. One by one, she connected them with red thread. It was the kind of thing that looked crazy to outsiders. Too much string, not enough answers, but the pattern was there. 2 people went out. The boat came back with only 1 life jacket, and someone lied about when it returned. She called the Knox County Archives next, requesting any photographs taken by Harbor Patrol during the boat recovery. Most of the materials from the 90s were still stored on microfilm. It would take a few days to get scanned copies. Meanwhile, she tracked down the original deputy who filed the incident report, retired now, living in Bar Harbor. She made a note to visit him the next morning. The case was widening like a ripple in water. That night, she sat in the dark with the photo again. The shadows around the 2 known faces felt darker now, like the negative space itself was hiding things. The hand on Paige's shoulder looked too deliberate, too casual. Whoever it belonged to had been comfortable there. Not a stranger, not someone sneaking aboard, someone who thought they had every right to be part of that picture. She turned the photo over. There was no writing, no label, just the faint indent of a thumb where someone had pressed down too hard. The photo had survived 3 decades underwater. It had been inside a waterproof diver's pouch, wrapped in mesh netting, tucked into a rusted tin case. Someone hadn't just taken the photo. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep it from being found. She closed the case file, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't just the mystery that disturbed her. It was the silence, a kind of long, uninterrupted silence that only existed when too many people had a reason to stay quiet. Someone out there had been on that boat. Someone who knew exactly what happened. And 32 years later, Marley Greer was about to make them remember. The man who answered the door looked older than his 71 years, his eyes pale and watery, skin like thin parchment stretched over bone. He squinted into the sunlight as if it pained him. His name was Everett Clean, retired deputy from the Knox County Sheriff's Office. Marley had tracked him to a narrow 2-story house in Bar Harbor where he lived alone, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and shelves of unread books. He didn't say much as he led her inside, just gestured vaguely toward the living room and lowered himself into a squeaky leather chair. His knees cracked audibly. Marley took the opposite seat, her voice gentle. "I'm here about the Whitmer case," she said. "You filed the recovery report in July of 1992. Clean nodded once, but didn't speak. We found a photograph, Marley continued, from a disposable camera recovered near Devil's Elbow. It shows Daniel and Paige on the boat, but there were two others in the frame, faces we can't identify. It's not just a missing persons case anymore. He stared at her for a long time, his jaw tight. Then finally, he exhaled. You saw them, he said. You saw the others. Marley blinked. You knew? No, he said. I suspected back then, but no one wanted to dig too deep. Not in a town like that. People had allegiances. What do you mean? Clean reached beside his chair and pulled a thick envelope from a dusty drawer. Inside were photocopies of documents, ones that hadn't been part of the official case file. Photos of the boat closer than anything Marley had seen. A second report with notes in the margin. A Polaroid of a waterlogged life jacket with a name stitched inside the collar. M. Tenko. Matthew Tenko, Clean said. You ever hear that name? Marley shook her head. He worked part-time at the marina in the summer of '92. No record of him logging hours. Paid in cash. Lived in a trailer up by Finch Hollow. Quiet kid, always watching. When the boat came back, I was the one who opened the compartment. That jacket was stuffed under the seat. His name, clear as day. I wrote it down, attached it to the file. She narrowed her eyes. It's not in the file now. Clean gave a humorless smile. Didn't think it would be. Marley sat back, processing. The rental ledger had the initials Mount listed the day after the couple vanished. Someone had logged the boat as returned and cleaned. Someone who knew how to make it look routine. Matthew Tenko. What happened to him? She asked. Vanished, Clean said. 6 months after the Whitmers. Just packed up and disappeared. Told a neighbor he was going to New Hampshire to join some religious coup. No forwarding address, I checked. Nobody by that name ever arrived. Marley flipped through the old photographs. In one of them, the skiff had clearly been photographed from above, likely taken from the dock during recovery. She leaned in. The front seat of the boat was empty, but in the back, the faint outline of something else. A second cooler. The original report said they'd only packed one. You think there were supplies meant for more than 2 people? She asked aloud. Clean didn't answer. He just looked tired. Haunted. Marley stood careful with the folder. I want to find him, she said. If he was there, if he came back, I need to know what happened that night. Start with the bait shack, Clean said. There was a guest ledger. People used to sign their names when they bought tackle or ice. My guess, he left a mark somewhere. Back in the car, Marley let the recorder roll as she dictated notes. Tenko was the first concrete lead she'd found. She added his name to the board the moment she got back to the station, circling it in red beneath the photo. She pulled the case file again, now with Clean's envelope in tow, and compared every detail. There was no mention of Tenko anywhere. Someone had scrubbed him out. The next morning, Marley visited the storage container behind the bait shack, the same one that had stood untouched since the early 2000s when the business went under. With Phil Mayer's reluctant permission, she pried the door open and stepped inside. A wall of rusted shelving lined with buckets of dry-rotted fishing line and gas cans. But near the back, under a warped workbench, she found it. A narrow red binder labeled in Sharpie. Customers 1990 to 1993. She pulled it free and flipped to July. There, between July 12th and 14th, 2 names had been scrawled in barely legible ink. M. Tenko C. Rhodes. The blood drained from her face. C. Rhodes. Daniel's middle name was Allen. Paige never changed her last name. Rhodes wasn't a mistake. It was someone else. She stared at the 2 names stacked one above the other, written in the same pen, same slanted handwriting. Whoever they were, they'd signed together. A second man, another accomplice. They weren't just out there, they were working as a team. She snapped a photo and closed the book slowly. Behind her, the old tin roof groaned as the wind pushed through. For the first time in 32 years, the story was starting to shift. It wasn't about a lost couple anymore. It was about 2 men who knew exactly what they were doing, and a plan that had worked until now. The name Rhodes echoed in Marley's head as she drove back toward the county archives. C. Rhodes. It hadn't appeared in any of the original case files. No record in the rental slips. No mention in Tobin Mayer's statement. Not even a footnote in Clean's off-the-book stash. But now it was scrawled beside Tenko in the bait shack ledger, dated 2 days after Daniel and Paige Whitmer disappeared. The handwriting matched. Same slope, same pressure. They had been there together and they'd signed their names like they wanted to be remembered, or like they thought no one would ever look. She'd run Rhodes through the department database before heading out. Nothing in Maine, nothing matching the initials. But when she cross-checked against Clean's old records, specifically the old personnel files from a now-defunct correctional facility 2 towns over, she found something. An old intake counselor. Hired in 1989, last name Rhodes. First initial C terminated in 1992, weeks before the Whitmers vanished. There was no photo on file, just a typed resignation letter and a scribbled note that read, "Boundary issues with juvenile detainees. Termination mutual. Advised not to rehire." Advised at the file on her lap. Advised not to rehire was the kind of euphemism departments used when they did and want to deal with the truth, the kind that got buried. Back at the station, Marley pulled the evidence photo from the wall. She focused not on Daniel or Paige this time, but on the shadowy silhouette behind them, the one watching the camera. The shape of the jaw, the buzzed hair. It wasn't clear enough to make out a face, but it wasn't nothing. She enhanced the contrast, brought the exposure down, sharpened the edge noise. Still fuzzy, still unclear. But the eyes, they weren't curious. They were studying. The expression wasn't one of surprise. It was control. Like whoever was behind that lens already knew how the day would end. She printed the image, cropped it to just the shadowed face, and labeled it with a question mark. By evening, she had a name. Clayton Rhodes, 59 years old. Last known residence, Freeport, Maine. His employment history included 2 youth camps, security job at a hospital, and a 6-month stretch as a night shift supervisor at a juvenile detention facility. No criminal record, nothing that would raise flags to the outside world. But every job termination included vague language, inappropriate boundaries, unorthodox behavior, conflict with staff. He moved every 2 years like clockwork, like he knew when people started to notice. Marley stared at his last known address, APO box listed in Portland. No attached phone number. The landlord of the listed apartment building said the name Rhodes hadn't come up in years, though one tenant, a woman who lived on the first floor, remembered him, said he was soft-spoken, kept to himself, drove a blue Suburban with missing plates. She'd said, "Gave me the creeps." Marley checked DMV records. No Suburban registered 2 Rhodes in the past 20 years. The man had scrubbed his trail clean except for that signature that he'd left behind, and it was enough. She pulled up archive news from the 1990s, scanned every article that mentioned Devil's Elbow, anything about the Whitmers, the marina, even the bait shack. Then she found it. A photo published in the Coastal Gazette on July 18, 1992. 5 days after the couple vanished, it showed volunteers dragging the skiff ashore. The caption named everyone in the frame, but it was the man in the background that caught her eye. He wasn't helping. He was watching, arms crossed, distant, dressed in a maintenance uniform not listed in the caption. She scanned the face. Same jaw, same short hair, same posture. She layered the newspaper photo over the blurred face from the skiff picture. Same man. Clayton Rhodes had been there the day the boat was recovered, watching it come home. Marley's stomach turned. She knew what this was now. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. It wasn't lovers lost at sea. It was a plan. 2 men, 1 boat, a young couple chosen for their isolation. Their predictability, their beauty, lured into a trap disguised as a honeymoon. And whatever happened next, it had been filmed, because you don't go to the trouble of bringing 2 cameras, one recovered in a diver's pouch, the other unaccounted foreign, unless you're planning to record something. She sat in the dark of her office, every light off, the case files spread like bones around her. She looked at the photos again, at Paige's smile, Daniel's squint in the fading light, the shadowed face behind them. She whispered it out loud for no one to hear but herself. You weren't supposed to come back, but one of the cameras had. And the truth was starting to surface. 32 years too late, but not too late to catch them. Not yet. The evidence room at the sheriff's office was cold and quiet, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube. Marley stood in front of the rolling metal shelves, hands in blue nitrile gloves, heart thudding. She had the key from the archives clerk, and she triple-checked the case number before she came. The original Whitmer disappearance file was boxed and labeled correctly, 920712. What she hadn't expected, but no one had ever logged, was the second box beside it. Unlabeled, dusty. No barcode, no sign-out sheet. Just a masking tape strip across the top with one word written in all caps. Watch. She slid the box free, holding her breath. It was lighter than expected. Inside, beneath a brittle sheet of brown packing paper, was a single VHS tape in a hard plastic shell. No sticker, no title, just black plastic, and a faint thumbprint smudged on the edge of the case. Someone had packed it with care, intention, like they wanted it to be found, but only at the right time. She took the tape to the evidence viewing room, locked the door behind her, and slid the cassette into the department's dusty old combo VCR unit. The screen buzzed to life with static, then color, then movement. A date in the corner. July 12, 1992. 6:32 p.m. The image was shaky at first. Aimed at the floor of the boat, a cooler page's sandal. Then the camera tilted upward. Daniel was laughing. Paige was mid-sentence, something about the tide, her voice soft and playful. They looked sun-drenched and unaware, like any other couple filming a vacation. But the angle was wrong. The camera wasn't in their hands. It was across from them, held low, slightly angled up, filming without their knowledge. Paige leaned toward Daniel, brushed something off his cheek, and smiled. The camera zoomed in slightly. Then the screen glitched. When it stabilized again, they were gone. The boat was empty, floating on calm water. 30 seconds of silence. Just the sound of water lapping at aluminum. Then a voice. Male. Calm. Slightly breathy. Ready? Another voice. Lower, closer to the mic. She's still warm. Marley froze. The camera jolted, now filming someone's legs. Wet jeans, bare feet, the edge of a hand reaching down into the frame, glimpse of dark hair. Paige. The camera moved again, now following as something was lifted. Arms, shoulders, head turned to the side. Paige was unconscious, or worse. Her head lolled. Her shirt was torn. The man holding the camera stepped closer, angling for a better view, but only for a second. The screen glitched again. Then it cut to black. Marley sat motionless, one hand still hovering over the pause button. Her pulse roared in her ears. Her mouth tasted like metal. It was real. The tape wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a ghost story. It was a record. And someone had taken the time to hide it. She ejected the cassette, slid it into an evidence bag, and sealed it with trembling fingers. Whoever had logged the original file hadn't included this. It wasn't part of the official inventory. So that meant someone in the department, maybe back then, maybe since, had watched it and kept it buried. She opened the old property chain log, the last name to sign out any Whitmer evidence, Deputy Clay Marin. March 1993. A year after the disappearance, 6 months before he retired early for personal reasons. Marley hadn't heard that name in years, but she remembered the rumors. Marin had gone off the grid after leaving the force, moved out west, stopped returning calls, said he didn't trust anyone anymore, that something about the Whitmer case didn't sit right. She'd thought it was just small-toe paranoia. Now she wasn't so sure. Marley scanned the video still and emailed it to Nicole Harson in forensics, requesting enhancement. In the message, she didn't mention what she'd heard. She just sent one line. Need ID match on male subject holding camera. Time code 1807. Cross-checked with suspected image of Clayton Rhodes. Then she stared at the screen. At the freeze frame. The one with Paige's face turned just slightly toward the lens. Eyes closed. Jaw slack. There was no question now. Paige hadn't drowned. She hadn't vanished. She'd been taken and filmed. The camera had kept rolling long after anyone thought it would. If this tape had survived, there could be more. There had to be more. Back in her office, she wrote one sentence on the caseboard in black marker beneath the timeline. Find the second tape. Because there was always a second tape. People like Rhodes didn't stop at one, and they never worked alone. Marley didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling fan until the sunrise began pushing through her blinds, her mind spinning over images she couldn't unsee. Paige's limp body, the voice that said, "She's still warm." The camera that kept recording. She kept hearing the click of the tape slot closing, kept seeing that single word scrolled on the masking tape box. Watch. By 7:30 a.m., She was parked outside the storage depot at Finch Hollow, a quiet, slumped-over facility just off Route 17. Half the units were rusted shut. A broken security light buzzed above the gate, clicking in and out of life like a dying insect. Sheedy followed the lead from the old utility bill left behind in Clayton Road's last known apartment. Buried in a scanned rental folder under a different name, Charles Delaney. It was a low-effort alias, probably fake, but the bill had been real. $43.12 paid monthly to Finch Hollow Storage, Unit 117. The address had gone cold in 1996. No forwarding, no cancellation, just silence. As she approached the office, badge clipped to her belt and knocked on the bulletproof glass. A blurry-eyed man in a hoodie appeared, sipping a giant mug of black coffee. "I need access to an abandoned unit," she said. "Law enforcement, Knox County. You've got a Unit 117 rented under the name Charles Delaney." The man glanced at her ID, frowned, and pulled up the ledger. "That one's been unpaid since. Hell, 1996. We sealed it years ago. Could have auctioned it, but never got around to it. Probably rats and mold by now." "Still need to open it," she said. "Now?" The man sighed, grabbed a ring of keys, and led her through the crumbling rows. Unit 117 sat near the back, one padlock coated in dust. Marley held her breath as the key slid in. The lock gave with a groan. She opened the door. The smell hit instantly. Out. Mildew, old paper, something sour and mechanical. Inside were 6 plastic storage bins stacked against the wall, one old steamer trunk, and a black duffel bag caked in mold. No furniture, no labels, just storage meant to disappear. She opened the first bin. Books, technical manuals on carpentry, plumbing, home renovation, some handwritten notes. The second bin held blank VHS tapes, dozens of them, still in their sleeves, unlabeled, the kind that could hold hours of video and never draw attention. She picked one up, still sealed. The third bin was full of clothing. Marley's stomach twisted. The sizes were wrong, too small. Girls' t-shirts, bathing suits, sandals, pajamas with faded cartoon characters, all carefully folded, all old. She closed the bin gently. The steamer trunk was locked, but the hinges were rusted. One hard pull and it creaked open. Inside were file folders, stacks of them. Handwritten names, dates, locations, notes scribbled in cramped handwriting. She read one file. Subject P.W. Date July 12, 1992. Initial intake. 6:47 p.m. Response to sedation. Compliant, disassociated, no struggle. Second session scheduled July 14, 1992. Canceled due to contamination risk. Recording archived. A small stack of Polaroids, some too dark to make out, others heartbreakingly clear. A girl, 6 years old, holding a chalkboard with a date, August 14, 1992, same day as the boat recovery. Marley gripped the shelf to stay upright. Paige hadn't died the night she was taken. She had been here, kept here, at least for a while. And if Paige had been here, maybe Daniel had too. She checked the box again. No photos of Daniel. No folder marked with his initials. No mention of a male victim at all. She stood trembling and looked around the room one last time. It was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, like something had lived here and left its shadow behind. She called it in. 20 minutes later, 2 cruisers and a black SUV arrived with agents and forensics techs. They swept through the cabin, tagging everything, photographing everything. Marley stood outside under the trees, watching the wind comb through the pines, listening to the distant murmur of Half-Bridge Lake at the shore. She could almost hear the oars, almost see the boat coming in. But it wasn't Daniel and Paige anymore. It was them. Rhodes, Tenko. 2 men with a plan, a location, a ritual, and 32 years of silence wrapped around their crimes like a curtain. One of the agents stepped out of the cabin holding a small object wrapped in tissue. A ring. Thin, simple, white gold, still bearing an inscription. To P forever. D. Marley took it in both hands. Daniel hadn't left her behind. He'd left a marker, a promise, something for someone to find, something to say, I was here, she was mine. We didn't go quietly. And now the world would know. The lab had pulled clean audio from PR number 12. It arrived at Marley's desk on a flash. Drive marked in plain black ink. Audio extract Rhodes. She plugged it in, put on her headphones, and closed the blinds. The waveform glowed across her screen. No music, no distortion, just breathing, movement, voices, then him. Clayton Rhodes. He spoke calmly, measured the voice of someone who had practiced being gentle. A man who didn't scream his commands, but whispered them like a teacher at story time. "Is the light too bright, sweetheart?" the girl's voice responded. It wasn't Paige, younger, drowsy, compliant. He asked her to lie down, told her the game wouldn't take long. His tone never changed, even when she began to cry. Marley stopped the playback and removed the headphones. She sat very still. The ring from the cabin was in a sealed evidence bag on her desk. She stared at it for a long time. Paige's ring with Daniel's name inside. Agent Kravitz had confirmed it had traces of old blood in the channel beneath the stone. Male DNA, too degraded for a match yet. But if Daniel had been in that cabin, there was a good chance he died there. She couldn't let herself believe otherwise. But the truth was unraveling in both directions now, past and present. And neither path led to anything she could bear for long. She pulled up the Rhodes file again. The man had no digital trail, no surviving relatives, no confirmed death. Just a chain of rentals, abandoned jobs, and P.O. boxes. She expanded the search across New England and cross-referenced anyone with juvenile access, history, and a vehicle matching the old description. Dark blue Suburban. Main plates, pre-1995. She got a hit. Not on Rhodes, on the vehicle. In 2001, the Suburban was impounded outside a remote farmhouse in northern Vermont, left abandoned after a neighbor called in a welfare check. The man inside had been dead from an overdose, but he wasn't Rhodes. He was younger, identity unknown. Rhodes's name wasn't mentioned in the report, but in the barn behind the farmhouse. Police had found a padlocked freezer full of VHS tapes labeled the same way. PR number 188, PR number 189, PR number 190, and so on. They'd never made the news. The tapes had been sealed, quietly passed to federal storage. Classified under an internal exploitation task force name, Family Sanctum Fellowship. Marley picked up her phone and called Agent Kravitz. "He's not the only one," she said, "and I think he gave this operation a name." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We know," Kravitz said. "We believe the tapes were circulated through a closed network of individuals. Small group, rotating locations, shared materials. We're working on identifying more members. Rhodes may have been a founder." Marley exhaled slowly. "I found the cabin. I found the ring. Paige was there. Daniel might have been too. And the others. Dozens. Hundreds maybe. We don't know how many yet. Did you watch PR number 13? No, you need to." Marley opened the secure viewing room again and slid in the tape. This one was different. It opened on darkness. No. Just the sound of waves. Then the faint metallic squeak of oarlocks. What? The camera adjusted. It was inside the boat, looking at Daniel. He wasn't dead, not yet. He was tied, wrists bound to the railing, head low, breathing shallow. A voice behind the camera, Tenko, younger, more frantic, spoke in hushed tones. "Do we keep him or finish it?" Rhodes answered calmly. "He's too strong. She's the focus." It was just context. Then Daniel spoke. It was a whisper. Raw, bloody. "You'll burn for this." Rhodes didn't respond. The camera turned. For one moment, Paige's face came into view. She looked straight into the lens. Her lip was split. Her eyes were alive, and then static. Marley pressed pause. She stared at the frozen image. Paige had known the camera was running. She had looked straight into it, as if begging someone, someday, to see her. And now someone had. Marley backed out of the room and slid the tape into a new evidence bag. That image, Paige looking into the camera, wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a witness, a survivor. And Marley would make sure the world saw it. She walked to the task force staging area where the agents were working through the catalog. "I want to go public," she said. "I want the photo, the ring Paige's image on that last tape. I want it all released." Kravitz looked up. "You sure?" "Yes." "Then we start with a name." Marley didn't hesitate. Clayton Rhodes and Matthew Tenko. Because this wasn't folklore anymore. It wasn't just a mystery. It was the truth. He'd been watching her. Marley felt it before she knew it, a slow, creeping certainty that settled at the base of her neck like cold fingers. Or it started as a shadow in her periphery, a car she saw twice in the same day. Then it became a man, middle-aged, khaki jacket, thinning hair, standing across the street from the station as she left for the night. He never smoked, never spoke, just stood with his hands in his pockets and eyes on the door. He never blinked. At first she told herself it was nerves. The case had wormed under her skin, crawling into her dreams, tainting every quiet moment. But by day 3, she knew she wasn't imagining it. He was waiting for her shift to end. He was always watching from a distance, always gone by the time backup arrived. She ran facial recognition off the security footage and got nothing. No driver's license, no warrants, no DMV record. It was like he didn't exist. But then, late one evening, he slipped. A red light camera on Water Street caught him pulling a U-turn. The plate traced to a vehicle rented 2 weeks ago from Bangor Airport under the name M. Canning. Fake ID. Prepaid debit card. The rental company didn't even have a phone number. But the time of rental, July 21st, 2 days after Marley had reopened the Whitmer case. She pulled every file again, spread them out like a deck of cards. Rhodes, Tenko, the bait shack, the ledger, the videotapes, the logbooks, the boxes, the ring. She needed to find the one thing they'd missed. The reason someone would come out of hiding now after 32 years of silence. She got it at 2:11 a.m., a noise from the back of the evidence vault. She wasn't supposed to be there that late. Technically a violation of protocol, but she couldn't sleep. So she came in to review the tape logs again, make sure nothing had been misfiled, and that's when she heard it. A door closing, quiet, precise. Not the front door, the back. She reached for her sidearm, heart pounding. The corridor between the archive and the vault was lined with case lockers and utility closets. She moved slow, silent, her breath held tight in her chest. Then she saw him. The man from the sidewalk, khaki jacket, calm eyes, standing in front of the evidence shelf labeled PR number tapes. He didn't flinch when she stepped into the open. "You're too late," he said. She raised her weapon, now on the ground. Now, he didn't move, just looked at her. "They're not all dead," he said. "You need to understand that. Not all of them died. Some were kept, protected, face down, hands behind your head." "She was special," he said. Paige, she understood what it meant. Marley fired one warning shot into the floor. He flinched this time, dropped to his knees. She cuffed him and called it in. He offered no resistance, gave no name. But when they fingerprinted him, the database hit came in seconds. Matthew Tenko, alive, arrested right there in the Knox County Sheriff's Office. In custody after 32 years of absence, he said nothing during booking. Refused a lawyer, refused food. Just sat still in the interview room, staring into the mirror. Marley watched him from behind the glass. His face was leaner, but the eyes hadn't changed. Still dead behind them, still scanning everything. She stepped into the room. "You know why you're here?" she said. Tenko smiled, slow and sour. "I was never really gone. Where's Rhodes?" I broke the smile. "Dead," he said after a pause. "Died years ago. But he left things behind. Things I kept." Marley stared at him. "Where's Daniel Whitmer?" Another pause, and gone. "Dead." Tenko leaned forward. "Gone." She wanted to punch him. Instead she said, "You brought hell into people's lives. You're not special. You're a predator." He tilted his head. "You think you've uncovered something deep, but you've only scratched the surface." She slid a photo across the table. Paige looking into the camera from PR number 13. Tenko touched the corner of the image. His hand trembled. "She wasn't supposed to be in the tapes," he murmured. "That wasn't the plan. She was for Rhodes. She was a human being. She was beautiful." Marley stood, "Going to bury you under the prison." Tenko said nothing, but his mouth twitched just once, like he didn't mind that idea at all. That night, Marley stood alone in the viewing room and watched PR number 13 again. Watched Paige staring into the lens, into time, into the future. This time she whispered to the screen, "I see you," and she meant it. They all would. 2 days after Tenko's arrest, a diver named Nathan Bell made a discovery that changed everything. He wasn't part of the official task force, just a local, formerly with the Coast Guard, who'd followed the Whitmer case since he was a teenager. Inspired by the reopened investigation and the FBI press release naming Rhodes and Tenko, he took his personal sonar out to Devil's Elbow and began sweeping the southern inlet and area. Never fully searched in 1992 due to a landslide that buried the Eastern Trail. At 3:12 p.m., his scanner pinged, 16 feet below the surface, beneath a curtain of algae and lake silt, lay the skeletal remains of a second boat. Not the skiff, not the one Daniel and Paige were seen departing in. This one was smaller, dinghy-style, flat-bottomed, untouched by weather, swallowed whole by the water and forgotten. Bell marked the location, dove with a GoPro attached to his helmet, and sent the footage directly to the sheriff's office. Marley watched it on her monitor with a dry throat and clenched jaw. The camera passed over cracked fiberglass, rope netting, and a waterproof duffel bag wedged beneath a broken bench. Bell opened it underwater and revealed the contents: clothing, a man's shirt, soaked but still patterned with a faint plaid, a shoe, a belt, and inside a sealed zippered pocket miraculously preserved a leather wallet. Inside it, Daniel Whitmer's driver's license. The photo was young, sunlit, 25 years old, newly married, still smiling. There was no blood, no damage to the boat, but there were scratch marks on the inner rim of the fiberglass. Deep ones, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Marley pressed pause. There was more. At the bottom of the duffel bag, just beneath the wallet, Bell had retrieved a second item, a microcassette labeled in faint black marker, "For whoever finds me, DW." She didn't wait. She called Kravitz, had the lab transfer the tape to digital within the hour, and then she listened. Daniel's voice was different than she expected. Calm, controlled. "This is Daniel Whitmer," it began. "If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. They took us, 2 of them. They said it was a mistake, that they meant to take someone else. But they didn't let us go. Paige, ... Paige was taken first. I tried to fight, but they drugged me." A pause, breathing. "They made me watch. Then they told me it was my turn." Marley clenched her fists. "I managed to get the key from one of them. Tenko, I think. He was careless. I got out of the first place they kept us, but not far. They found me by the shore. Beat me." Rhodes didn't say a word. He just watched. I think they meant to kill me and bury the boat. But the storm came, and something went wrong." Another pause. A quieter voice. "If this tape is still around, tell her family she didn't give up. Paige fought until the end. And if they tell you she ran away or fell overboard or whatever else, they're lying." The final sentence was slower, barely above a whisper. "Please burn it all." Then silence. Marley sat for a long time before she moved. When she finally did, she copied the tape to 5 separate drives and placed the original into the department's fireproof vault. Later that night, she stood at Devil's Elbow. The wind off the water was sharp, the sky thick with low clouds. Somewhere beneath her feet, Daniel's final words had waited decades to be heard. And they were. She lit a match and dropped it onto the rotted remains of the bait shack ledger, the one signed C. Rhodes 2 days after the couple vanished. The pages curled, blackened, not justice, not yet, but the beginning of it. And the first thing to burn was the lie she arrived just after sunset. Marley had just finished briefing the media team when the call came from dispatch. A woman claiming to be Paige Whitmer's niece had flown into town. She wasn't expected. No appointment, no coordination with the task force. But she was already standing at the Devil's Elbow dock, asking for the detective who'd found the tapes. Marley drove fast. The dock looked just as it always had, splintered, salt-burned, half its boards warped from the tides. The woman stood near the end, silhouetted against the water, her back to the parking lot. Mid-30s, brown windbreaker, hair pulled up. When Marley stepped closer, the woman turned. For a second, Marley forgot how to breathe. It wasn't Paige's niece. It was Paige. 32 years older, eyes the same, and not in any database. They stood staring at one another, the sound of the tide folding in and out beneath them. Then Paige spoke. "I saw what you released." Marley's voice came slowly. "You're not dead." Paige said. "But I was gone." Marley struggled for words. "Where have you been?" Paige looked out at the water. Far enough to stay safe, close enough to know when it was finally over. She handed Marley a sealed envelope, thick, weathered. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Children, rooms, faces, all labeled with names and dates, timestamps. These were taken by Rhodes and by the others. Some are still alive. Marley looked up, stunned. A were part of something larger. D, the fellowship wasn't just Rhodes and Tenko. It had layers, safe houses, rules, and Daniel. Page's face changed, softened, and cracked all at once. He died saving me, she said quietly. They moved us after the cabin, but Daniel fought. They thought they'd killed him, but he wasn't dead yet. Caused a fire, gave me enough time to run. I was 16 miles from a ranger station before I stopped. Marley didn't speak. I never came forward because I didn't know who I could trust, Page said. They were in the system. Police, courts, foster networks. Rhodes used to call it the door inside the door. You think you're out and there's another one waiting? You're safe now, Marley said. Page smiled sadly. No one's safe. But some of us are watching now. We found each other. Marley looked again at the photos in her hand. Are these ... Some are still missing, Page said. But they're not dead. I know where at least 2 are. 1 in New Hampshire, 1 in Pennsylvania. But I can't do this alone anymore. Marley nodded. You won't. Page turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the dock. They never expected me to remember, she said. But I remember everything. Then she walked into the darkness. Marley stood there for a long time, the waves slapping gently beneath her boots, the envelope still warm in her hands. She looked out at the water where a boat had once drifted, where Daniel had left his ring, and Page had left her voice frozen on film. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. 2 weeks later, the task force raided a property in rural Pennsylvania. It was a private home with a church-like steeple and blacked-out windows. Buried behind a tree line so thick it didn't show up on satellite until they adjusted the light spectrum. A drone sent ahead had caught glimpses of children's shoes near the barn, burned barrels, a cross carved into the dirt. Inside they found what Page had warned them about. 3 survivors. 1 male, aged 19, 2 girls, younger, 10 and 12, pale, underfed but alive. They had been raised on stories of judgment, of the outside world as corrupt. Their family was a cycle of silence and reward. They called themselves the ones who stay. None had ever been to school, none had ever seen the ocean. But all of them recognized Page's name when shown a photo. She was the one who got away, the boy whispered. She promised she'd come back. The tapes in the basement numbered over 200 VHS and Betamax, some broken, some warped from fire damage, others pristine, cataloged by initials and date, and all of them were copies. The originals, they learned, had once been stored across 3 states, traded between guardians, encrypted under a code known only to a few. But now, slowly, with each search, each confiscated envelope, they were pulling the thing apart, tearing it down one name at a time. Page stayed close to the investigation, quietly, never on record. But she shared what she remembered, names, faces, routines. She walked through sketches of buildings, long destroyed, recognized handwriting, corrected dates. Marley watched as a network that had lived underground for more than 3 decades began to crumble in the daylight. But there were still pieces missing. Like the man in the Polaroids, the one who was always just out of focus, the one they'd started calling the overseer. His face was never clear, never full, but always there. Behind the girls, in the mirror, in the shadows of the princess room. A figure with gloves and a cane, never speaking, only watching. Marley showed the photos to Tenko in federal lockup. His eyes changed. The water slapped against something wooden, slow, repetitive, like oars. She turned, but there was nothing. Still she listened, and just faintly on the breeze, a chime, low, distant, a bell. It could have been wind, could have been imagination. or it could have been the last piece of a machine still humming beneath the world. The tapes were just the beginning. What they'd unearthed wasn't a man or a cabin or a boat. It was a system, a sickness, a door inside a door. And somewhere, someone was still turning the key. April 2nd, 2025 location. Knox County Sheriff's Department Evidence Vault. The envelope came in a plain brown mailer with no return address. No note, just a timestamp on the postal barcode, 1:14 a.m. Dropped at a 24-hour parcel box 3 towns over. Inside was a single item, an unlabeled VHS tape. No markings, no writing, no dust. It had been handled recently. Marley stared at it for several long seconds before sliding it into the secure player in the viewing room. The screen flickered, crackled, then came to life. A slow, static-heavy shot of a shoreline half-bridge lake, but not present day. The colors were wrong, the grain too thick. It was dated. July 16, 1992, scrolled digitally in the bottom corner. The camera zoomed in. Daniel and Paige stood at the end of the dock. Daniel was helping her into a life jacket. She laughed, waved. They looked so ordinary, so untouched. The boat waited behind them. Oars tied down, cooler packed. The sky was clear. Then the camera panned left to the trees. For the first time, Marley saw him. Not Rhodes, not Tenko. The third man, the one from the mirrors. Face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Gloves on. Holding a cane with a silver wolf's head carved into the handle. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But he looked directly at the camera, as if he knew it was recording, as if he meant for it to be seen someday. Then he turned, stepped backward into the brush, and disappeared. The tape cut to black. Marley sat still for a long time. She rewound it, paused on his silhouette, printed the frame, and added it to the board. The case file was no longer titled Rhodes, Clayton, or Tenko, Matthew. Now it had a new name. Unknown operator, alias, the overseer status. At large, investigation ongoing, and just beneath the label, Marley placed a final note. Paige was the first to escape. She won't be the last. Then she locked the vault and turned off the lights. Outside, a cold wind passed over Half-Bridge Lake, and somewhere deep beneath the surface, a boat still rested, waiting, but not alone anymore. What was the significance of the ring? What happened to the other victims? How can I help with this investigation? A case that was presumed closed for over 3 decades has been torn wide open, revealing not just a cold case, but a living conspiracy. With Matthew Tenko in custody and Clayton Rhodes gone, 2 parts of the machine have been stopped. But the final frame of that last tape is proof. The true architect of this horror, the overseer, is still out there. The hunt is not over, and we will be covering every new development right here. To stay on this case with us, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. Every great investigation needs theories, so let us know yours in the comments below. Who is the man with the cane? Thank you for watching. The truth waits for those who are willing to look.